known to happen. Jews are lived in all kinds of places. That's the bottom line. From a Hasidic, Kabbalistic perspective, the idea of exile is partly about going around the world and regathering these scattered sparks of holiness that can be found in any place, in any nation, and reclaiming them. The idea of exile is not just Jewish people are spread out, but it's that holiness is diffused.
And learning goes on all over the globe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Rabbi Bash used to say, at any one point, because of time differences and timelines, like someone's learning
someone's learning Torah
somewhere.
Right. They say if there was never Torah learning, at any point there was no Torah learning in the globe, then the world would have to stop existing.
Amazing.
Thank you, Chabad.
That's right.
That's what she used to say with the Chabad Rebbe.
What did they use? So
remember when Rabbi was talking about the hammer, right? And
I bought the book this week.
Okay.
We can discuss that as our topic.
We were aghast.
Aghast at the idea,
But you had to designate it first.
Right.
So Rabbi Grossman said that no, right? So here it seems that this is the Rabbi Grossman, approach, and here it talks about designating.
Right.
So, if Rabbi wants to clarify.
Okay, designating.
This is the Rabbi Grossman tab.
Okay, so I actually, believe it or not, I bought the book to look because let's do that.
Well, I was reading about Muktzah and I was like,
we'll talk about Muktzah today.
So
what has nothing to do with the parsha of the week, as far as I know, nothing to do with the season, as far as I know, other than the fact that there's a Shabbos every week. So that is always timely. One of the interesting things, I think Rabbi Grumman pointed this out, that if you go through the Gemara Shabbos, parts of which I have, it's one of the longest sections of the Mishnah in terms of has 24 chapters, although it's not the longest, because Kalim has 30 chapters. But there's no Gemara on Kalim. There is a Gemara on Shabbos. So the tractate of the Mishnah and of the Talmud that talks about Shabbos is 24 chapters long.
When you say there's no Gemara on Kalim, you mean it's just Mishnah?
Just Mishnah, right. When we think of the Gemara, which is the Talmud, those are synonymous words. The Gemara / Talmud is really a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah has 6 sections. Each section is called a Seder. Seder means an order, so just like the Seder that we do on Passover. There are 6 orders of the Mishnah, which really means in 6 categories, 6 topics. And about 2/3 of the Mishnah has Talmud commentary. Thank you. Approximately 1/3 of it does not. Like the Mishnah has 6 sections. The first one is about agriculture, largely about the laws of farming that apply in Israel, such as tithing, orla, all kinds of things. Largely with things which things that the farmer has to give to the Kohen or to the Levi, or things that you're not allowed to do. And most of these things only apply in Israel, at least at the biblical level. So most of it doesn't have Talmud, I think for the simple reason that Talmud was written in Babylonia, and Babylonia is very far from where we are today, but it's basically all the same in the sense that it's not in Israel. There's only 2 types of things, right? There's in Israel and out of Israel. And most of these missions only apply in Israel, and therefore the Talmud, by the time that was written, we were already out of Israel. So they didn't comment, except for the first section. In the first tractate in that section is Brachos, which talks about the Brachos that we make, and that, of course, is relevant, and therefore there is Talmud. That's the only out of the, there's roughly 10 tractates in each order, in each Seder, so to total about 60 altogether. So the first section about agriculture, 9 out of 10 don't have any Talmud on them. Second one is Moed, it's about the calendar, Shabbos and holidays. That, of course, there's lots of Talmud, except, I think the exception is Shkolim, which is about the half shekels that were collected every year, and that was to fund the temple service, so there's no Talmud on that. The third section, Nashim, women, that's really matrimony, marriage, divorce, etc. That does have commentary on it. The Ezekiel is the next one. It damages, but really means monetary law, all kinds of monetary law, buying, selling, real estate. That does have Talmud commentary on it, of course. The next one is Kachim, sacred things, that refers to temple service, sacrifice, and such. There is actually commentary on a fair amount of that. I'm not sure why, like that particular section does, considering that it was equally not practiced in the times of the Talmud, but it does. And the last section is Taharos, purification, which is mikvah, the red heifer, all kinds of things. And again, most of that does not have Talmud, even though, interestingly, let's say the one tractate that it has is Nida, that's a woman's cycle, which of course is relevant, but something like mikvahs, which is about the construction of the mikvah, you would think is equally relevant, yet there is no Talmud on that. So it's obviously not completely scientific in the way that I said it, but again, roughly a third of the Talmud does not have, a third of the Mishnah does not have Talmud commenting on it, although even those parts that aren't, don't have a Talmud commentary are often cross-referenced in other places. So if you do the Talmud in the sections where we do have it, you'll come across a lot of Mishnah in places that are quoted and brought in and commented on. So you'll learn a fair amount.
So we have the laws of, let's say, mikvah.
So there is a Mishnah, and again, many places in the Talmud will cite, and I've come across references to the construction of a mikvah or the laws of how a mikvah operates, and they're found in other places, cross-referenced, because everything is like that. It's very different from the way you would organize a textbook today. Everything is by association. Sometimes you'll have a rabbi who doesn't get quoted that often, but he gets quoted about a particular topic, and once we quote his statements, we'll quote 5 other statements the same rabbi made because, hey, while we're quoting Rabbi so-and-so, let's quote 4 other things he spoke about. That happens. That's very, very common to have things like that. Someone said, I don't remember if I saw this in the Jewish source or it was just kind of one of these common sense things, that it seems to make sense that, if you look at the Talmud as kind of you write a book today, the way Arthur would write a book, for example, or you'd basically organize it to be user-friendly and to be as scientific and methodical as possible. But if you consider the fact that the oral law was supposed to be oral, and it was only written to prevent it from being forgotten, and it was done kind of begrudgingly, not begrudgingly like with resentment, but kind of as a necessity with no choice, and the idea was to get away with as little writing as possible. It may seem very wordy sometimes, but it's not. The point is that not so much how many words or how few words, but how much are we going to commit to writing, how much are we going to leave. They definitely wanted to leave as much as possible to the oral, and so they kind of explained things, didn't explain them too well, they hinted at things, they left a lot between the lines so that it would remain kind of, just enough that you wouldn't forget it, but not enough that it would be spoon-fed to you or that it would be. So it makes sense that you would write the book in a way that as a memory aid. So Rabbi so-and-so, let's quote 4 other things he said. The goal isn't to organize it and make it easy. The goal is that you shouldn't forget it. And that in terms of memory, it helps to have things associated with each other. And it's maybe hard to follow the law, but that's okay if it's hard to follow. You should have to work hard. Anyways, so what's interesting is, so the laws of Shabbos, that there obviously is Talmud on that, and there's 24 chapters. And we know there's 39 kinds of work, so there are chapters that discuss multiple categories of work. The topic of muktzah comes up. There's a fairly extensive discussion of muktzah, which is not one of the 39 types of work. It's a rabbinic concept that they forbid us from handling certain kinds of objects, items, on Shabbos. And there's this kind of running theme about yesh muktzah or ein muktzah. Is there muktzah or is there no muktzah? You say, what kind of question is that? So believe it or not, we follow the opinion of ein muktzah. There is no muktzah. And it's kind of as you start to, it's one of these things where you're so used to using the words in a certain way that we don't even realize sometimes. We only know the bottom line. Of course there is muktzah, right? We know muktzah. But yesh muktzah means a much more restrictive set of rules about muktzah that would be, even we think that with a lot of things that we can't do, it would be an even more far-ranging definition of what muktzah is, and we don't hold of that. We hold ein muktzah meaning a much lighter form of the muktzah restriction. Nevertheless, we do believe in muktzah. Basically, what the point is that when we talk about muktzah, things that you are forbidden to handle on Shabbos, it's not a binary yes or no. The concept of muktzah is that we should be mindful about not just what we do in terms of not doing work, but we should be mindful even about the objects that we interact with. Kind of the broadest way to say it, or what we what we pick up or handle with our hands. Um, that being said, doesn't mean that it's either yes or no. In some cases, we can use things to some extent, use them a little, use them under certain conditions. And the point is that it creates, and that's one of the explanations of muktzah. So, the most obvious explanation from muktzah is if it's used for work, don't pick it up, and that will help you remember not to do the work. So that's kind of, we all grow up with that. Matches are muktzah because you use them to light fires. Since you can't light fires, don't even pick up the match. Pens are muktzah because you use them to write things. And because you can't write, don't even pick up the pen so you wouldn't forget yourself on writing. By the same token, hammers are muktzah because you use them for construction. Don't pick up the hammer so you don't do construction. But it's really more than that. That's not the only interpretation of what muktzah is about. And we mentioned this the other week. I think it's Rambam. Somebody said this is a whole different concept. Muktzah is really has a different goal. Torah says not to do work. And work, as we know, doesn't really mean physical labor per se. It means physical action, things that modify the world. Avodah, like work, like we talk about the Jews did work in Egypt as slaves. You don't say they did malacha. It wasn't that they were just schlepping bricks around. The point is the Egyptians made them work hard. But when we talk about what we can't do on Shabbat, it's not malacha. Malacha is more like a craft or a task or a job. It's something a constructive activity that, like God created the world. God didn't do work. He created the world in 6 days, and the rest of the Shabbos means he was actively building the world and constructing it for the course of 6 days. And the seventh day, Shabbos. Shabbos doesn't mean rest. We say Shabbos Bayinafash. He did Shabbos, and then Bayinafash means he rested, caught his breath, so to speak. The word Shabbos means to cease, to stop something. So Shabbos is a day of stopping. That's literally what it means. The 6 days are the days of working and moving, doing, and Shabbos is a day of stopping. That's why Shabbos is compared to the next world. Not because the next world is relaxing, because in the next world is a world of just being what we are and what we've become over the course of our lives. The short life in this world is the life of doing and building ourselves into something, hopefully something good. The next world is a world of status quo. That's what Shabbos is all about. That's what we say. Whoever works on Friday eats on Shabbos. Shabbos, we just exist and experience what we've prepared over the course of the week. Again, hopefully something good. That's why Shabbos is like the world to come. So the idea of work is constructive activity, and what the observation is that there are people who don't work. Like they're retired or they're lazy or whatever it is that they are. They have different. Maybe they do other. Maybe they have, or they don't work for a paycheck outside the home. But maybe they may be very busy. But the point is they're not actually doing work. Maybe they're a caretaker for someone and they do a lot of work, but it's still feeding, dressing, an old person, a young person, whatever it is. So for them, Shabbos is no different from any other day of the week. So how will Shabbos, and what's important, that Shabbos is supposed to be distinctive in every way, especially in positive ways, depending with different clothing, different food. But how does somebody who doesn't work all week long, with the main distinction of Shabbos is missing? So the rabbis came up with the idea of muktzah so that everybody, that's something that is relevant to everybody. Everybody has to think about what objects they can handle on Shabbos and what they can't, so that creates a distinction. The point of it, that kind of explains, a hammer is muktzah. We're familiar with that concept. Although, again, that falls into the ein muktzah category. A rock is also muktzah. Which is more muktzah? The instinct is to say the hammer, but the rock is actually more muktzah. Now, if muktzah is simply a way to get you not to do work, that would seem to be backwards, right? The more something is developed as a tool, the more likely it is you'll use it for work. But the reason that a rock is more muktzah than a hammer, the muktzah really means set aside, or in this case, not set aside. You can say it either way, but muktzah is off limits. And the idea is that on Shabbos, things that we use on Shabbos should be things that were set aside, that were designated for Shabbos use. Things that were not set aside, or even were specifically mentally disassociated, we should not use. So that's the concept of really, you can call it like a white list or a black list. You can look at it as that, the only things, anything that I didn't intend to use on Shabbos shouldn't be used. Or you could say I should only use things on Shabbos that I specifically intended to be used for Shabbos. Either way, the point is that things which kind of mentally were never on the radar as being a usable item for Shabbos are muktzeh. Things which were, in some sense, mentally within the set of objects that my mental packing list for Shabbos can be used. That now so now we can understand. Yeah, put it this way: food. I think the food is the most. I think say food and utensils, kitchen utensils. There's no muktzah. Everyone agrees. You can play with a fork if you wanted to flip a fork in the air and catch it. You can do that on Shabbos because food is obviously meant to be eaten, and there's no restriction at all on food because food is absolutely books or neutral books, let's say. I don't know, math book or a broom and dustpan.
Did you say
math book? Yeah.
No.
Well, let me. A book. Yeah, you can. Let's say a key, a lawn chair, something like that. So those things are kelim shemalachtam leheter, items of permissible use. I don't believe we practice this. There is an opinion that they're certainly not muktzah in the sense that we would consider, but you should only pick them up for a purpose. So if you wanted to juggle a lawn chair, or you had a key and you wanted to just kind of idly fidget with it, that would be, you say, why? What's the problem? The answer is, these items the thinking was that these items are designated for permissible use, and they can be used for permissible use, but they shouldn't be handled for no reason. I don't believe that we actually practice. The truth is that it's almost irrelevant because who does? I mean, usually when you pick something up, there's a reason why you're picking it up. So, but it's kind of an eye-opening concept when you think about it. That again, this distinction is drawn: food and food utensils. There's no restriction at all because they're sort of so much in the purview of what we use that they're like clear and present. Other things, they're available for use, but if you're actually using them, then there's items of forbidden use, hammers, pens. Those things you cannot pick up and handle. But if you have a specific permitted use, I need the hammer to crack a coconut. I need the pen to pry open. No.
Okay. So I should take a hammer and crack open it.
If that's the best available item. I heard once that if the alternative would be going to another room to get another item, that's already enough of a reason. If you have the hammer and nutcracker sitting on the table, you should use a nutcracker. But if there's any level of inconvenience, and then you have things which I would never use. For example, a cell phone. You only use it for, or let's say a shechita knife. So you can't use those at all because they're expensive items that are only used for one purpose.
Valuable.
And valuables and rocks. Why? Because the common, they're almost polar opposites, right? A rock or a stick, dead leaves, and a shechita knife or an expensive precision tool. The common denominator of both those things is that there is never any reasonable expectation that I would have a use for this on Shabbos. So they're the most right. They're the most restricted because they're the least on my mind. They're the least on the radar as far as items that I might have a use for on Shabbos, and that's the concept. So from food being kind of the most obvious, accessible, a rock being the least accessible item, and the hammer being somewhere in the middle. That's the concept of muktzah on Shabbos, the way we practice it today.
So how did you say it? Something that can be criticized, like how
Muktzah means something set aside or kind of something I've written off or I have mentally disassociated myself from it. Right? Muktzah means kind of, but certainly it's like set aside. We think about sometimes you set aside something in a positive sense. I'm setting this aside to use it. Sometimes you set aside something in a negative sense. I'm setting this aside. I'm not using it. I've kind of detached myself, mentally disassociated myself from this thing. So this is kind of the concept. When you open a book like this, you look at the bottom line, and it's sometimes easier. Maybe that would be less confusing, but sometimes it helps to understand the concept behind it. So this.
So we really don't have to, as individuals, set something aside because we as a
Correct.
have already.
And that's what I meant when you do the Gemara Shabbos. Basically they call a hammer a non-muktzah item because it isn't really muktzah. It just has restricted use. Rock cannot be used for anything.
If you use the cracker burners, not.
No, cannot.
No, not you smash
Because a rock, the whole idea is that a hammer, you have in the back of your mind, a person who has a hammer.
Because the rock is still remote.
Right, because
It's not natural.
the idea is that a hammer is mostly used for forbidden things, but occasionally used for permitted things. And an item like that, in the back of your mind, it falls under the category of items that I'm probably not going to use in Shabbos, but that I might occasionally have them used. That's the reason you can use the crack opener, not because everybody who has a hammer knows that, like in our kitchen, we have a muktzah drawer, and there are 3 drawers, one on top of the other, and there are 3 power drawers. The top and the bottom one have non-muktzah things. The middle one is muktzah. The top one has like, maybe a nutcracker and maybe a spoon, and the bottom one has a ladle. The middle one has like a garlic crusher, but the bottom one has an egg slicer. These are all like similar items. The middle ones are ones actually like, well, which drawer does that belong in? This one, it's so close that these things are this is mostly used, a measuring cup, right? It's mostly used for a forbidden act, which is measuring. But occasionally, I might just use it because I just scoop something out, and and you can see that happening, which is why it gets put back in the wrong drawer sometimes, because like people get confused. Does it go with the ladles, or does it go with it? And it's understandable that would be considered.
And that's what it's all.
Yeah, peelers, right.
But you couldn't use it on Shabbos.
On Shabbos, right? We don't use peelers on Shabbos.
But you use it to fry something.
Yeah, if you needed to, if you didn't have a suitable alternative that was permitted, and and again, right, the point that you made is that this is not really a personal specific thing. These are all a kind of universal concept. Now, there is a concept, and we'll have to maybe explore this. We can dive into this further in the weeks ahead. There is a concept of personal intention as well, and that's really just an application of the same idea. It's just more specific. There is such a thing. Again, the idea of a hammer versus a rock versus a fork, those are all categories that apply universally. Nobody needs to make any special circumstances that pertain to that. But there are cases where something might be based specifically on my intention or my lifestyle. So there might be a rock that I find interesting and unusual looking. Maybe I'll bring it into my house and wash it off, and maybe polish it a little, and I want to use it to sit on my desk and occasionally as a paperweight. That would be not really different from all the other rocks that are found in the world, but because I chose it and set it aside for a purpose. Even a hammer, right, used to be a rock or a mineral. It used to be metal under the ground, and at some point it was converted into something that people would call a hammer. So the question is, what does it take to elevate something from being a rock or a stick into being a tool, or maybe again, that's kind of a longer discussion, but basically the most I guess the easiest and most the highest level of designation would involve both a physical action and an intention. So it's obvious. I think you don't want it. I took a piece of wood, carved it into a shape, and I did that with the intention that this would now be a tool. So I take a 2x4, I take out my tools, and I carve it into a spoon, and I put it in my kitchen. Obviously, not a piece of wood. Now it's a spoon. Where it would get more complicated was if I picked up a piece of wood, I did nothing to it, but I put it in front of my door as a doorstop, and then I did that, and I left it there for a few days, and then a few weeks. Is it now something else, or is it a piece of wood that happens to be holding my door open? And the converse, right? If I took a piece of wood and I, played with it a little, polished it, painted it, but I wasn't necessarily. Maybe I was just, practicing my woodworking skills or just fidgeting, and it turns out to be a pretty usable item, but maybe my intentions weren't so clear. So that's what becomes tricky. basically, so there's a caveat. I have to refresh my memory of the guidelines, but I believe the general guideline is if my intention was to designate it permanently for this purpose. So I take a piece of wood, use it to hold open the door, and I say, this as long as this wood, I can use this forever. As long as this wood doesn't get lost, and as long as it's still in good shape, we'll just use it. Seems to work, right size, right shape. So that now it's a doorstop, even if it looks the same as it did 5 minutes ago. Right. Right. It's also possible to have something more temporary, where I set something aside, at least for this Shabbos, and I don't remember the guidelines for that. In some cases, maybe it's the case where you're doing it for a more temporary designation. It is necessary to do some kind of action that's to process it and make it, in some way. But okay, let's.
Then what is this about designating?
Okay, so designate. So where are you?
Yeah.
Oh, there. Okay, so designating. Okay, that's all. Okay, that's what. So maybe I don't have to do the research because you already did the research for me. An object which would otherwise be muktzah, right, the highest level of muktzah, like a rock or a stick, has no use at all, is not so, meaning it becomes non-muktzah, becomes permitted, if before the commencement of Shabbos one designates it for some permanent use that's permitted on Shabbos. Right? Exactly the case we were just describing, the permanent doorstop, right? Okay. It is sufficient if the designation is in thought, right? Exactly like we just said. If the object is of a kind which, when used, is used in its existing condition, then in case of need, it is enough that the designation was for use only on one Shabbos.
But only to be used for what it's designated.
Well, what they're saying is, if it's the kind of thing that doesn't need any processing, again, the doorstop would be a good example. If it's perfectly suitable as a doorstop, then even if I only meant to use it for this Shabbos, I said, having the air conditioning is broken, I really need a doorstop just to keep the door open for the Shabbos. This will work until after Shabbos, and I'll call the repairman. So then, even though it's a temporary designation, I'm not really converting this into a doorstop. It's going to go back into my woodshed and be used for something else, and carving it into some other shape. So it should still be muktzah, but since at least for this Shabbos, I'm using it as a doorstop, and it's perfectly suitable and really isn't missing any. If I wanted to designate it permanently, this would be adequate. So in a case of need, in a pinch, you can get away with, at least for this Shabbos. That's based on intention. Right. An example is a stone conveniently shaped for cracking nuts. So if the stone is a perfect shape for a nutcracker, even if I don't intend to use it permanently, I tend to use it only temporarily. But in the case of need, if I had in mind for this Shabbos.
For Shabbos, but on Shabbos, if you wanted to do that, then it's muktzah and you can't do it.
Right, you can't do nothing. The rule of thumb is that the beginning of Shabbos determines the status of any object. So anything which is muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos can't become unmuktzah until the next Shabbos. And he says similarly, designation for use on just one Shabbos is enough in the case of things which are used on a one-time basis. So it's kind of a similar thing. If it's the nature of the thing that it's kind of a one-time use. So, for example, he says you have sand, you designated it to cover up an oily patch on the floor. So the whole idea when they had dirt floors, or even if they didn't, anyone who would use sand or like salt, right, to melt snow, it is a one-time use thing. So if you had salt that maybe was meant to be used in, I don't know, a chemical plant for some purpose, and you said before Shabbos, oh no, it's supposed to snow and people will slip. I'm going to use this bag for to salt my walk in case it snows. So obviously that's not a permanent use because by definition it's not a permanent thing. But in that case, it's adequate because that's the way.
So on Shabbos, you can take salt out of that bag and put it on your set?
Right. Because you had the intention. You had the intention, right.
And the reaction thing is not a thing against Shabbos.
No.
Yeah, that's. I think. Right. I believe that's not considered to be an issue. Right. I think. Yeah. No, it is a good question. There is an issue with melting ice. Right. There's an issue with melting ice on Shabbos. I believe. Right. I don't remember why.
You can't fill the ice cubes like we
thought. There's different opinions on it. The issue with melting ice. And maybe I don't remember why the snow is better than melting. It might just be because it's a safety thing. It might be because you're not retaining any of the melted snow. It's just, as opposed to when you're melting ice, it's typically because you want the water. But if you have ice cubes and you're trying to melt them, it's because
I'm learning that now, and
Yeah.
there are so many different opinions, forgetting the stardom who do it.
uh,
I mean, that some of it, according to what I'm learning, is it depends on if you're gonna need it. Like
melting
if
ice
you
is not. It's certainly not a malacha. It's not work in a biblical sense. There might
That's
be
making
no odd
ice cubes.
creating something new or changing the state of something, which would be a rabbinic prohibition, and there could be leniencies under certain circumstances.
So I can make ice if I thought I was going to need.
So I think there's different opinions on it. So there probably are, a license
Yeah.
in case of need, because there are people who say it's permitted. That's probably what you were reading.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what I was reading.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see if we can do.
Even melting the ice, putting it
Right,
in
just-
the ring. If you put the liquid in first, and then the ice, it's different than if you put the ice in first and then that, which is okay, and which isn't okay.
You think the fishes are in Florida?
No, they're gonna go visit this one shore train.
Oh, and their smoke is awesome.
So this week we have Parshas Ekev. So Ekev means because or end result or consequence. That's how they explain it. It's a funny word. I mean, an unusual word, I guess. What?
What's the definition of muktzah?
The definition?
Yeah, like what is it?
Set aside.
It is set aside.
Yeah.
Okay, now
Yeah.
on to Ekev. What is
Yeah,
that?
What's the definition of Ekev? That's a harder thing to translate. Ekev can mean heel.
Right here.
Like
So that's
Yaakov.
what we know.
Right, like
That's
the-
how we
yeah,
know.
right.
But the rabbi just said something different.
Right. So when in English we use this expression on the heels of something, right?
Right.
This comes on the heels of that, which usually means right afterwards. It's used in a similar sense, not quite the same, but this follows as a direct consequence of that. And that's I think the typical explanation. That
Is there a word similar to this that is used with Russian horror, that something is the heel of Russian horror, or?
avak, that's avak.
So
That's a different word.
or is that
I mean, it's
heel?
dust. Yeah, that's a different word because it's an aleph instead of an ayin.
I see, yeah.
According to Rabbi Shamson Raphael Hirsch, I think he has a whole. He wrote a commentary on the Chumash, and he apparently had an approach in which he said in Hebrew there are letters that have similar sounds. We maybe pronounce them identically. Originally they were differentiated, but everyone agrees. Like say a kof and a kaf. Maybe today we say them the same. There are some Sephardim we say them differently, but they're clearly closely related in their pronunciation. So his theory was that there are many roots in Hebrew. Typically, words have three-letter roots, and there are roots that are similar. Like Ekev and Avak might be an example. Certainly, there are words that. What's an example? Now I'm going to draw a blank, but it says